Shut up and sit down.
Howdy guys, it's Andy from Big Mac's Workshop and Painting Studio, and today we're painting something a little bit different. We are working on a dog warrior from Infinity. Now this is like a big angry werewolf dude set in the future, and it's a present I got for Christmas from my little lad, so thank you to you, dude. So it's a metal model, so as you can imagine you do have to varnish it a couple of times, and we start off with a black primer as always. I'm doing a little bit of zenithal work, but don't worry, as this is all going to be done glazing. It's not an airbrush tutorial. I'm just using a light grey to assist with the glazing work, as it will show through somewhat on the coats of paint as we're glazing through and blending. And it's just to allow us to get an extra bit of depth on the model with the highlights, etc. So, starting off on the upper sections of a fur, I'm using Storm Vermin fur. As you can see, it's really thin, and I'm just using that on the rear sections of the wolf. Leaving some of the areas of the fur are going to be done in brown, as I'm basing this on a North American timber wolf for the inspiration for the colour scheme. For the brown sections, I'm using Vallejo's Terra Earth, and I'm using that across all the different sections: feet, tail, torso, etc. But I'm also leaving some colour. I'm also leaving some space open so I can use regular skin tones as well. And for the regular skin tone, it is Tuscar fur. Now all of these I'm using all this with a wet palette, so as you can see the paints are incredibly thin, so I'm going to be needing 2 or 3 layers just to get a solid colour. Well, as you can imagine, this is not a big deal, as there's going to be loads and loads of glazing involved, and loads of wet blending and glaze blending, etc., to get some really cool colour transitions. So now I'm starting to throw a few gentle highlights onto the grey sections, which is a mix of Storm Vermin fur and cold grey. It's around about 70-30 in favour of Storm Vermin, keeping it fairly dark, but allowing me to just add some texture to the model, which is also going to assist with the blending into the skin colours as well. So as you can see, I'm just feathering the paint, making some extra textures into the skin work. So I've now added some Tuscar fur into the mixture, and what I'm getting is a sort of a pasty grey, almost flesh colour, and I'm just starting to glaze that onto the flesh and into the grey sections as well. I'm starting with the really wet paint in the skin colour sections and letting it pull nearer the grey sections, so you get a nice subtle transition. Now this is the sort of colour I'm using at the minute, which is that's the Storm Vermin fur at the bottom end, obviously Tuscar fur and cold grey at the top, and I'm just using that through the wet palette, mixing away as and when I need to. So once I've got some kind of transition work started, I'm going now onto Cadian Flesh to start adding some highlights into the flesh, and this again is incredibly thin, so I'm even able to go onto the grey sections of the fur and even to the brown sections as well, because I'm going to be doing this blending work across the entire model. So I'm just adding some additional highlights to the human skin, as I've decided it's going to be painted like a classic werewolf, and I wanted a sort of a mid-transition style colour. So now I've added some harvested flesh into the flesh tone, and I'm just picking out the highlights on the model, working around the knuckles, around his torso. He's got six-pack. All the sections what you would expect him to have more definition. Now, so once I've finished with the mix of Cadian and Harvester, I've added some extra Harvester, so it's pretty much pure Harvester at this point. I'm doing much the same thing with the highlights across all of the model. Obviously I'm only working on one hand at the minute, but the same colours will be going across the board and also blending into the other skin colours as well, such as the grey and the brown. So here we are, just transitioning away into the same colours, and I'm adding just a touch more Harvester Flesh. This is much the same colour, and I'm just really blending and glazing this model. I'm starting off as before. I'm using really thin paint, and I'm bringing the model I'm bringing the paint all the way up to the highlighted blends of the greys and the browns. So now this is added some to the Harvester Flesh. I've added Moonray Flesh, and both these two colours are scale 75, and I'm just continually doing the same thing, obviously on a narrower scale. Again, this is very much glazed paint, so I'm just glazing these colours ever so gently, and because it's such a thin paint, you've got a lot of time to move the paint around, so you can really position the colours wherever you want them to be. And if you do go somewhere you're not wanting to be, you can actually just add some dark into it and just blend it again. So now this is almost pure Moonray Flesh at this stage. I'm just finally touching the knuckles and the sections of his wrist where the bone would protrude through the skin somewhat. I'm just getting those last highlights up, so we've got something resembling an actual flesh hand. So now it's chocolate brown, and that is going into the which is a Vallejo colour, and that is going into the mixture between the skin and the brown fur. Again, this is glazing. This is a really time-consuming process, so make sure you've got a good quality wet palette, and just really take your time and enjoy what you're doing. It's really therapeutic to get some good quality glazing in. And the chocolate brown is just going into the flesh in much the same way as the Harvester Flesh and Moonray did. Just starting off at the on the flesh sections and pulling it into the brown sections, so you're getting the same transition as the paint will pull at the where you finish, because the paint's really thin, and it allows the paint to dry where you want it to do. So you're essentially aiming towards the brown sections. So now I'm adding Baneblade Brown into the colours now, and that is going into between the browns and the greys. I chose Baneblade as it's got a lot of sort of a grey tone to it, and you can add it into the grey colour without it taking too much away from the colour itself. And this, as you can see, this is really thin, and I'm just throwing some into the muscle textures to blend the two together. Now that was a very thin wash, and now I'm just starting to glaze it through between the grey and the brown, focusing on the muscle textures, but making sure that the making sure that the blend is really smooth, so there's no obvious start and finish points at each of the different colours. So I'm doing exactly the same thing onto the skin, starting with the Storm Vermin Fur and Cold Grey, bringing that colour together across the back and the muscle textures around his legs. So now I've got some Cadian Flesh. I'm just mixing it again into the brown sections of the muscle. As you can see, there's a bit of extra depth, so what I've actually done is I've thrown a couple of really thin Agrex Earth shades onto the model, and also onto the grey sections of the model, onto the entire model, and a very thin non-oil into the thick fur sections on the greys. And that's just to add a little bit of extra depth to the model and tie some of those colours together. And what I'm doing here is much the same as what I did on the arms. It's just throwing those browns and Acadians together just to get those blends really smooth. I'm just doing exactly the same as I've done across the rest of the blending work, and to get a very cohesive, interesting colour shift from the greens and the grey, the brown, and the flesh colour. So I've got, in some sections, I've got a three-way blend, and it's just a case of mixing the colours and just applying them very, very thinly to allow you to have the time to get the colours where you need them to be. So here we are. I'm just adding some really thin chocolate brown into the areas between the brown and the flesh, and also the grey, and it just adds an extra bit of detail. Also makes a much more natural blend. So if you look at a photo of a wolf, their fur is not one colour. It's a combination of greys and browns and creams, and that's what I'm trying to replicate here. And again, I'm just throwing some more of the same colours just to tie those colours together and get the blends as smooth as possible. There's no point taking this quickly. Glazing is a very slow process, so you may as well just relax and enjoy it. So now I'm starting to highlight the fur on the thicker section fur, and I'm using a mix of chocolate brown and a touch of carrot stone just to brighten it up a little bit, and I'm just touching the fur sections ever so gently with the point of the bristles, making the neck fur a lot more interesting, a lot more colourful. I'm also adding some of that colour to the texture on his muscles as well. Again, as pretty much a running theme with this paint is ever so thin, giving you more time to work with it, and it allows you to really make those highlights really nice. And you're constantly pulling the paint to where you want it to end, where you want the highlights to actually be. This again gives you extra control over the paint, and you get the blobs of the colour where you need it to be. So now I've added a 50-50 mix of Agrax and Nuln Oil with loads of thinner, and as before I'm adding that extra depth into it by giving it a full wash all over the flesh to start to tie those blends together and really get an interesting depth of colour to the model. And that's the cool thing about washes. When you're glazing, you can really use it to your advantage and get those mixes and blends to really stand out using the filters from full wash. And back to the highlight again on the brown, which is again the same colour as what I've used before, and just to tidy up any areas where I just need a little bit of extra work, just to make them pop back a little bit more, and just to get rid of any of the excess depth what has been created by the wash. Now the Agrax, I actually did 2 washes of that, which obviously the second one I did off camera, and now I'm back to the highlights again all over the inside of the torso sections with that same mix of chocolate brown and a touch of Karak and Acadian flesh. Now I use Acadian flesh as it obviously it's similar to the flesh tones that I've already used, and it allows it to blend a little bit easier to get those highlights where I need them to be. So again, I'm now adding a little bit of texture to the muscle sections across his pectorals and that, just to give a model a little bit more definition. The interesting thing with glazing though is doesn't matter how many highlights you've got on there, it doesn't start to thicken the paint up too much. So you can get plenty of highlights on there, really start to pick out the structures of the muscles and the tendons. You can get some really cool effects with it. And I'm really trying to get the hang of glazing, as it's something I'm not necessarily the best at. So I really wanted to work on that. And now I'm adding the cold grey into the storm vermin fur and a touch of the brown, just to allow the blends to go together well. And I'm just doing exactly the same thing as what I was doing on the brown onto the arm sections of the muscles, the biceps, trapezius, etc. And just to blend those browns in with the greys. And take your time again, as this sort of thing is well worth it. And I do apologise if I'm repeating myself. It's just it's a nature of glazing. It's essentially the same thing over and over and over. You just keep on doing it until you get the colour transitions you're after. Added some more cold grey into the colour to really pick out those final highlights on the muscles and across the top of the fur. This again, there's still some brown in there, just in case I needed to blend it in with any of the browner sections. But as always, just picking out those highlights and moving the paint towards the peaks of the highlights, as that's where you want the majority of the paint to sit. And now another Agrax and non-oil wash, just to finally get some extra depth into the thick fur sections and also across the face. Now, like I said, the washes are really handy when glazing. It really does allow you to allow the filters to really pull the colours together. So when you do your glazing highlights, it really does help. Touch more work on the skin work again, making sure that the blends are good, making sure that those highlights are right, and obviously I've put a full Agrax wash over the entire model, so I'm just tidying the skin work again, just to make sure that they don't look too dirty. Agrax does have a side effect of making things look dirty rather than always looking just that extra bit darker. So especially on skin colours, it can cause problems using Agrax, so just be aware of this. Right, now I'm happy with the skin work. I'm starting on the other colours now. So it's Rhinox hide for the strapping and his scabbard for his knife. I decided to use this as it would be sort of a natural colour. It's meant to be some kind of werewolf soldier, so he's going to use dark colours rather than anything bright and colourful. The guy clearly is going to know what he's doing, so he's not going to want anything what's going to really break his outlines. And I went for Cayman green on his trousers. Now, this inadvertently made him look a bit Hulk-like, which is kind of cool. But I wanted something coloured like fatigues, without going down the route of camouflage, as I didn't want to detract too much away from the blending work on the skin. If I'd have gone for a camo pattern, I could have taken away from that. So after the Cayman green's gone down, I took a couple of layers. I then threw a Phonian camo shade as a nice wash across all of the short sections. So there's a lot of detail in there. You can actually see the hems, I think that's the right term, and where the stitching's gone down. It's really well detailed on there, so I wanted to be able to pick that right out. And once the Phonian camo shade is dry, which it being a wash takes ages, it's a bit Cayman green again as the tidy up colour, to pull all those shades together and get rid of any excess pooling, which sometimes happens when you put a wash on. Now, Cayman green's a colour from Vallejo, but you could use one of the GW greens. I'm not sure which one would be the best to get a similar sort of colour, but I'm sure there's something out there. I've now mixed Cayman Green with Undead Flesh. Undead Flesh is sort of a greeny cream colour, like the old zombie flesh colours from way back with GW. It makes a great mix with the Cayman Green, so it keeps it on the green spectrum, but also adds a sort of a creaminess to it to make a nice highlight. So it just lightens it up somewhat, and without actually changing the tone of colour. Undead Flesh, what I've used here is a scale 75 paint, but your mileage may vary. You'll be able, I'm sure there's other colours. Like I say, what you're looking for is a subtle green cream colour. So now I've added some more into it. I'm picking out the highlights now, adding it towards the creases in the model, towards the front areas wherever the light's going to hit. The definition on the model is great, so you can really pick out those highlights. But as before, I'm keeping the paint incredibly thin, so it's almost glazing still. So some more Undead Flesh into it, and I'm keeping those highlights to the extremities of the upper sections. For want of a better term, I'm not sure what to call it, but making sure that the highlights are just ever so thin, and just making the most prominent sections that are a little bit more bright. And after that, it's adding another Euphonian camo shade just to blend all those colours together. And this has been thinned down with some airbrush thinners. I tend to use that for my for thinning paint, thinning my washes with. I find it works a lot better than Lamy medium and all water. It's just something for me. I tend to use that. But obviously, whatever works for you, just thin your washes down with whatever seems appropriate. You just want to make sure that those washes go down really thin and spread nicely. So at this stage it needs a matte varnish just to protect it and also get rid of any shininess from the washes. So I've hit it with a matte varnish straight out of the airbrush. Obviously if you use a rattle can, then just be really careful. You don't want the varnish to be too thick. So once the varnish is dry, it's back onto the level work, which is Dryad Bark. Now it's a very subtle transition from Rhinox Hide, so it works really well. And as before, focusing mostly on the extreme sections, but there is sections where underneath could do a little bit of highlighting, so I'm just making sure that those areas as well get the treatment they need. So now I've added some Gorfor Brown into the Dryad Bark, and I'm just gently feathering those highlights in down the edges of the model and blending some of it in a little bit as well. And if you do find that the highlights are a little bit too strong, then just add a touch of a Dryad Bark back into where it was. That's a bit of a wet palette. You can always just mix back into some of the original colour, and that allows you to have a bit more control on your highlights and your colours. At this point now it is just pretty much pure Gorfor, but again I've still got access to the darker colours just in case I screw something up, which is frequent with me, and I'm sure you all from time to time screw up on the highlights, get the wrong colours somewhere or put too much in. So just be aware you can always just blend some of your older colours in as well. At this point it is just final touches with a bit of Gorfor Brown, just on the same areas, but just finishing those highlights, making them really pop out. So onto the metallic work now. So I'll start off with black metallic, having already blacked out the metallic sections to get a better coverage. I wanted black metallics a nice dark colour, but it still has the appropriate shine. Now obviously combat weapons don't really shine the same way as standard metallics do, but I wanted a little bit of shine to the model as well, because it's quite a dull colour scheme, doesn't have any shiny bits to him, so I wanted to do something a little bit more vibrant on there. Once the black metallic's gone down, it's now oily steel as the first highlight. This is quite a dark colour, but it's still, obviously it's a flat metallic, so you do get that nice shine to it as well. I'm picking out all the edges with the oily steel, making sure that there's plenty of the black metallic still showing through, but it is pretty much, it's almost a base coat. For the edges, it is chrome by Vallejo. I use the Vallejo Air chrome. I find that Vallejo paints are some of the better metallics, as the pigment's really strong, but it does actually allow you to mix with the water. They do mix with water to thin down a little bit nicer as well. So once the chrome's gone down, we're now throwing a non-oil over all of the metallic work, just to pick out the depth of the details again, making sure that everything's as it should be. And there we have it. That is a great big werewolfy creature. It's had a pin wash at this point. I could have probably brought the highlights on the green a little bit more, and I really should have spent a little bit more time working on the talons and the claws. But overall, I'm quite happy with the paint job, and yeah, I think he's a very cool model. I really enjoyed painting this one, a little bit different for me. So obviously, we've got some thank yous. So first things first, we're going to thank all our viewers. Thank you for watching this, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to be on Patreon, check out our videos on Patreon. We have a link in the description, as we do have a link in the description for merchandise, etc. And so special thanks go out to D-Wack, Warren, Love Minis, The Orc Boys, Joe Spearpoint, Ludwig Hofbauer, Kit Lindquist, and the Alchemist of Dawn. You're our top paying Patreons, and we could not do this without you. Every bit of help what you offer is awesome. Also check out our affiliate link, which is Outpost from Sheffield, which do cut price models, and pretty much everything we use in the studio you can get through them. Just use the affiliate link below and you will get all kinds of discounts on pretty much anything you want. So if you do want to check out more of this sort of content, please hit like, hit subscribe, share with your friends, and we shall catch you in the next one, guys. Take care. Ta-ra.